The funny thing about Samsung phones every year is that the Ultra gets treated like the star of the show. It gets the big camera numbers, the giant display, the extra hardware, and all the headlines and the attention. And then the regular Galaxy S26 shows up like it's just the smaller one you buy when you can afford the Galaxy S26 Ultra. But I actually think Samsung has this backwards because for some people, or for most people, this is the Samsung that makes the most sense. This is the one you can actually use comfortably with one hand. It feels like a flagship, it feels fast, takes good pictures, and still gives you the Samsung experience that people want. But somewhere along the line, flagship phones got very confusing. Bigger became better, the most expensive things became more serious, and more features became more complete. But when you strip all that away and ask a very simple question, which of these phones would an average person actually enjoy using every single day, the answer starts to look a lot more like the regular S26 than the S26 Ultra. And we can start this off by just looking at the size. The S26 has a 6.3-inch display and weighs around 167 grams, and that might not sound dramatic until you remember how rare it has become to get a flagship phone that is this manageable. Samsung's own lineup makes the contrast very obvious. The S26 Plus moves up to 6.7 inches and 190 grams, and the Ultra goes all the way to 6.9 inches and 214 grams. That is a meaningful difference in how a phone feels in your hand, in your jeans or on a run, or when you're lying in bed trying not to drop your phone on your face. And this is one of those things that spec sheets never really capture properly. A small phone is not just a smaller phone, it changes the entire relationship you have with it. You reach for it more casually, it asks less from you, it does not constantly remind you that you are carrying around a giant expensive device. It just works. And that is a real advantage. And I think too many people have been trained to think that if a phone is not the biggest one in the lineup, then it must be the lesser one. But for a lot of people, the opposite is actually true. The bigger phone is the one that is asking you to compromise. It is asking you to compromise your comfort, your convenience, pocketability, and everyday ease of use just so you can say you bought the most phone. Then there is the performance, and this is where I think a lot of reviews lose normal people. Because every year we get dragged into benchmark charts and thermal graphs and all these edge cases that sound very impressive, but it doesn't really reflect how most people use their phones. With the Snapdragon 8 Gen 5 for Galaxy, it improves cooling with better thermal design, and that's fine. I have noticed the difference. But honestly, the reason performance matters on a phone like this is much simpler. It's just feelings. Does it feel instant? Does it feel like the camera opens quick? Can you jump between apps or edit a video very quickly? That is what a lot of people care about. And the S26 is the kind of phone where performance should disappear into the background. You don't want to constantly notice the processor, you want to notice that your phone never becomes the problem, and this is exactly the kind of device that should deliver on that. Fast enough to feel premium, polished enough to feel dependable, and powerful enough that most people are never going to seriously hit the ceiling. That is another reason I think this is the phone most people should buy, because the regular S26 still gives you flagship speed without forcing you to pay the ultra money for power you may never touch. Battery life is also very similar. The S26 has a 4300 mAh of battery, and for a smaller flagship, that is where the S26 matters. Because if this gives you a full workday of messages, your social media, videos, camera, and maybe your hotspot for your laptop, and it still gets you home without anxiety, then it's doing its job very well. And so far, it is a one-day phone. I actually think this is one of the best ways to understand this phone, a very dependable phone that can easily be relied on. Now let's talk about the cameras, because the S26 gives us a 50 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide lens, a 10 megapixel 3x telephoto, and a 12 megapixel selfie camera. Nothing new here, as this is the same camera system since the Galaxy S23. It's disappointing really, but it's not all bad. I still think this is a good camera for the way most people are actually going to use their phone. When you bring it out, you can get a nice picture from your main camera, a solid picture from your ultra wide, and you can get a useful 3x zoom. And for social media, casual night clips, food with friends, and everyday point and shoot stuff, it is very reliable in this setup. But I also don't think Samsung can keep getting infinite goodwill from recycling the same camera story every year. Another downside is the shutter light problem, especially with moving subjects. Since the S26 is still working with the same general camera hardware approach, it is still fair to say that the issue has not magically disappeared. So for still subjects or normal everyday shots, I think the camera is pretty good. But if you're trying to freeze fast motion in tricky lighting, this is not the phone that I would trust the most. Now the S26 cameras are good enough for most people, and in a lot of situations, they are genuinely very good. But they also feel old, and the motion capture weakness is still part of the story. Both things can be true at the same time. Now, when it comes to software, I think this is where Samsung still has one of its strongest advantages, but this is also where I think it is easy to waste time talking about the wrong things. Because every company now in 2026 has some kind of AI story, and a lot of this sounds very important for about 5 minutes. Then you stop using half of it when you're using the phone. Samsung is obviously leaning hard into Galaxy AI once again, but the only AI features that matter in a review like this are the ones that survive the real life. So for me, especially, it's really about what I use in my daily life. Things like circuit to search matters because they are very simple, it's fast, it's useful, and I can use it just like that. In my gallery app, features like object eraser, remastering are the kind of things that people will use and come back to because they solve obvious problems without making the phone feel like it's trying so hard to impress you. Samsung also keeps pushing Galaxy AI more broadly, but I think the stuff that matters most is the simple, repeatable quality of life features, not the flashy demo material that we see when it comes to the keynotes. Now here is where the review becomes very uncomfortable, because if I'm going to say this is the Samsung most people should buy, I also need to be honest about the weakest part of the pitch. That is the price. And this is the one area where I think Samsung made this phone harder to defend than they should have. In the US, the S26 is $899, while the S25 lineup had low entry pricing and more low memory storage combinations. The S26 also now has higher memory and higher storage, which is about 12 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage at the floor. So part of the price story is that Samsung raised the baseline spec, but that does not automatically make the value feel better to a normal buyer. Do I understand that the component cost went up? Of course. Do I understand that faster chips cost more and that Samsung can point to the higher base memory and storage? Of course, I understand that. But the buyer is too busy with their lives and they don't really think about these things. They are looking for value. But when you're deciding whether to buy this phone, go in with clear eyes. You are paying more for a phone that is generally better than its predecessor, but the gap between the price increase and the headline upgrades is real, and it's fair to feel some friction about that. Whether the math still works in your favor depends almost entirely on what you're upgrading from. If you're coming from the S23 or older, this upgrade is easy to justify and the value proposition still holds. If you're coming from an S24, it is harder to sell, and you'll probably be waiting another cycle unless you have a very specific reason to move. If you're using an iPhone and you're curious about Android but intimidated by the Ultra's price and complexity, then the S26 is actually a better entry point than most people realize. It's not overwhelming, it doesn't feel like you need to learn a new system, it's just a phone. It feels intuitive from day one. And if you were seriously considering the Galaxy S26 Ultra, but the price gave you a pause, I want to actually push back on the idea that going with the S26 is settling. Because for most people and their use cases, they look at phone calls, social media, navigation, streaming. I think the S26 delivers the full flagship experience without the compromises you'll be making on the size and the weight that you get. The S26 Ultra is the right phone for a very specific kind of person. Someone who genuinely uses the zoom on their phone, someone who shoots a lot of content on their phone and then uses the S Pen for serious work. And if that's not you, the Ultra is a lot of money for features that are going to sit unused for a very long time. The Galaxy S26 is not a consolation prize, it's far from it. It's not what you settle for when you can't afford the real thing. It's a phone that was thoughtfully built to be excellent at things most people actually need in a phone and want their phone to do. And it does all those things without asking you to carry a brick or paying for capabilities that you'll never use. That to me is a smarter buy, and I think it is worth saying that out loud. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I will catch you guys in the next one. But if you're trying to freeze fast motion in tricky... Yeah, welcome to Toronto, bro.